There's a type of tiredness that no amount of sleep can cure. It's not the exhaustion of working too much or the exhaustion of sleeping poorly. It's the exhaustion of holding on, of holding everything, of trying to control every detail of your own life with your hands, as if the moment you opened your fingers, everything would crumble. Perhaps you know this exhaustion better than anyone. Perhaps you've lived your life trying to control everything around you, hoping that in this way you will be able to win and achieve everything you've ever dreamed of. Understand that you are not alone on this journey. And today, through the story of one man, I will explain why you feel the desire to control everything and why when you let things flow, that's when everything really starts to change. The story I'm going to tell you today is about a man named Mackenzie. He was 30 years old and had built a life that in his own opinion seemed perfect. Career, gym, a relationship, a routine. But inside he was broken because for him nothing was enough, nothing was safe enough, nothing was under control enough, and the more he tried to hold on, the more things slipped away. Today I'm going to tell you what happened when Mackenzie finally learned to let go, and more importantly, what happened to his mind when he did, because it's not just a story of self-discovery. It's a story about what neuroscience, modern psychology, and one of the oldest Japanese philosophies in the world have discovered about what happens to the human brain when it stops fighting reality. In 1998, researchers at Harvard University conducted a study on what they called the illusion of control. They placed people in situations where they believed they had control over random outcomes, buttons that did nothing, lights that turned on by themselves, and they discovered something disturbing. The more people believed they were in control, the more anxious they became when the results did not match their expectations. The problem wasn't a lack of control. It was the belief that control was possible. A study published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology revealed that people with a high need for control consistently exhibit elevated levels of cortisol, the stress hormone, even in objectively safe situations. These individuals' bodies are in a constant state of alert, as if the entire world were a threat. And on the other hand, research on meditative practices and philosophies of detachment indicates that people who learn to accept the impermanence of things show greater activity in the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, the region of the brain associated with balanced decision, empathy, and a deep sense of well-being. The Japanese call it liberation. Modern psychology calls it resilience. But at the heart of it, they're both talking about the same thing. You can spend your whole life holding on, or you can learn what Mackenzie learned. Before I continue, I want to ask you a quick favor. If you're not already subscribed to the channel, I invite you to subscribe. It's free, takes 2 seconds, and helps me a lot to continue bringing this type of content to you. Also, leave a like on the video. It makes a huge difference to the growth of this channel. And in the comments, I want you to answer just one thing. What is the thing you have the most difficulty letting go of in your life? It could be a person, a situation, an old version of yourself. Now, let's get down to business. Chapter 1. The man who held everything. Mackenzie woke up at 5:15 every day, because the list of things he needed to do was already running through his head before he even opened his eyes. Gym at 5:45 a.m. Protein calculated down to the last gram. 8 hours of work where he arrived before everyone else and left after. Studies at night, courses, books, certifications, a relationship he tried to manage like a project with goals, expectations, and silent demands. Mackenzie was the most organized person you could ever meet, and that was exactly what destroyed him, because behind all that organization there was a fear. A deep fear that without control, everything would crumble, that without constant effort, it wouldn't be enough, that without constant vigilance, life would simply swallow him up. At work, he needed to be the best. When someone received praise that he didn't, he would stay up thinking about what he had done wrong. In his studies, a lower than expected grade would throw him off balance for days. In his relationship with his girlfriend Camille, he needed to know where she was, what she was thinking, if she was happy. And when she didn't reciprocate in the way he expected, he pressured her without realizing that the pressure was the poison. At the gym, I compared every muscle, every number on the scale, every progress with an impossible ruler. In the mirror, I always saw what was missing, never what was already there. To the outside world, Mackenzie was successful. To the people around him, he was too intense. To Camille, he had become suffocating. To his boss, he was good but difficult. To his friends, he was the kind of guy who was rarely truly present, because even when he was with someone, his mind was elsewhere, calculating, planning, controlling. And for himself, Mackenzie was exhausted in a way he couldn't name. But as happens to everyone who tries to control everything, the day came when the control broke. It was a Thursday night when Camille called him to talk. Mackenzie already knew this day would come. He tried to control so many variables that he had already thought about what he would do if Camille called him for this conversation. He tried to control everything until that moment, arriving at the conversation with prepared arguments, with solutions, with a mental list of things that could be adjusted. "Mackenzie," she said with that calmness that hurts more than shouting, "I can't stand feeling like I'm just a variable you're trying to manage anymore. I'm not a project." She left, it simply was. And that was worse than any scream could have been. In the following days, Mackenzie tried what he always did. He acted. He sent thoughtful messages, tried to analyze where he had gone wrong, created a plan to win her back. But Camille no longer responded, and that was a shock to Mackenzie. The feeling that something had completely spiraled out of control and his girlfriend's silence was a reflection of that. At work, his concentration vanished. A presentation that should have been simple turned into a disaster. He started stuttering halfway through, lost his train of thought. The boss didn't say anything, but his gaze said it all. At the gym the day after the break, he tried to train as if nothing had happened. He lifted more weight than he should have. He hurt his shoulder. In 3 weeks, 3 of the things he tried hardest to control had spiraled out of control all at once. And at that moment, Mackenzie didn't know what to do. He had no plan. He had no next step. He sat on the apartment floor at night with the light off and stayed there. Camille's words were hammering in his mind, and Mackenzie began to reflect on how he had tried to manage his own life in recent years, and he began to recognize that perhaps he needed help. And that's what he did. He sought help even though he wasn't entirely convinced it would work. Chapter 2. The psychologist he almost didn't visit. Mackenzie had tried therapy before twice. The first time he quit after 3 sessions because the psychologist was too slow. The second time lasted longer, about 4 months, but he stopped when he began to feel he was making progress. He had confused self-control with healing. This time it was a friend who recommended psychologist Yumi Nakamura. "She's different," his friend said. "I can't explain it. She doesn't try to fix you. She shows you what's already there." Mackenzie approached with skepticism. The kind of intellectual skepticism that comes from someone who's read enough about psychology to think they understand how it works even before entering the room. Yumi's office was in a quiet Miami neighborhood on the 2nd floor of a 2-story building. Simple. A large plant in the window, a bookshelf with books in Japanese and English mixed together, a lit candle that perfumed the air with something he didn't recognize. Yumi was around 40 years old, a descendant of Japanese immigrants to the United States. She spoke slowly, as if choosing each word carefully, like someone placing pieces on a table before assembling it. In the first session, Yumi didn't ask about Mackenzie's girlfriend. She didn't ask about work, she only asked one thing: how would you describe your relationship with things that are not under your control? Mackenzie gave a clever, articulate answer with well-constructed examples. Yumi listened attentively. She waited a few seconds after he finished, and then she said, "You just described a warlike relationship. You're not living, you're managing, and when life doesn't obey, you feel defeated. This isn't a problem of strategy, Mackenzie, it's a problem of belief." He returned for the second session, and for the third. In the third session, Yumi arrived with a small book. She opened it to a page and handed it to him. "Are you familiar with this concept?" At the top of the page in kanji and below that in Latin letters border non-self, she translated one of the central ideas of Zen Buddhist philosophy that has profoundly influenced Japanese culture. The idea that the self you believe yourself to be, the Mackenzie you need to control, that needs to be the best, that needs to keep everything in place, that self isn't real. It's a construct, a story you tell yourself. Mackenzie crossed his arms. So I don't exist. Yumi smiled. You exist, but not in the way you think. What Muga's philosophy proposes is that suffering arises from attachment to a fixed identity. When you say, I'm the guy with the best physique, I'm the guy who never makes mistakes at work, I'm the guy who maintains the perfect relationship, you're tying your existence to results that don't depend solely on you, and when those results change, what happens to your sense of who you are? He didn't answer, but something inside him trembled. Attachment, Mackenzie, isn't about things, it's about the narrative, I need this to be who I am. When you let go of that narrative, you don't abandon your goals, but you let go of the belief that your identity depends on them, and something in your nervous system truly changes. Chapter 3: What Happens in the Brain. In the next session, Yumi brought a sheet of notes. She liked to combine philosophy with neuroscience, saying that one without the other was incomplete. When you're in constant control mode, she explained, your prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for reasoning and planning, is working in overdrive, and your amygdala, which is the emotional alarm system, is firing off threat signals even when there is no real threat. She made a simple drawing on the paper. The result: the body enters a state of chronic stress, elevated cortisol, compromised immune system, impaired sleep, difficulty concentrating, more impulsive decisions because the brain is exhausted from regulating everything. You're not unwell because you're weak, you're unwell because you're asking your nervous system to do something it wasn't designed to do indefinitely. Mackenzie was silent for a moment. And when does a person learn to let go? That's where it gets interesting. Yumi put down her pen. Neuroiming studies show that people who practice active detachment, who learn to observe thoughts and situations without merging with them, develop greater thickness in the ventromedial prefrontal cortex. This region is associated with well-being, empathy, and balanced decision. The amygdala decreases its reactivity. The body exits threat mode. Memory improves, creativity increases, even sleep quality improves. But there's something more important than all of that, she continued. When you stop identifying with the results, you can act better toward them, because the fear of failure stops being the fuel, and fear is a terrible fuel. It works for a while, but it burns the structure it's supposed to support. Mackenzie thought about the shoulder he'd hurt at the gym, about the stutter during the presentation, about the thermometer he'd stared at his whole life without realizing the mercury was rising because of the pressure he himself created. So how do I stop? You don't stop all at once. You learn to let go slowly, and you start by understanding what you're really letting go of. Yumi returned to the concept of Muga several times throughout the following sessions. She didn't teach it as doctrine, she taught it as a tool. Think about it, she said one afternoon. You have an idea of who you are. That idea has been built up over the years from experiences, comparisons, other people's expectations, fears. It has a name, it has characteristics. It has patterns of behavior, but it changes every day. You are slightly different from who you were yesterday. So, who is the you that's trying to control everything? I still don't understand how this helps me stop feeling bad when things get out of control. Because when you stop believing that your identity depends on a specific outcome, the outcome ceases to be an existential threat. You still want things to work out. You still act toward your goals, but the difference is that if things don't work out, you don't fall apart because you know you are bigger than any outcome. It took weeks for this to start making sense in practice. But one afternoon, returning from work after a meeting that hadn't gone as planned, Mackenzie realized he wasn't constructing a catastrophic narrative in his head. He was simply observing what had happened without merging with it. It was a fraction of a second, but it was different. Chapter 4: Wabi-Sabi and the Beauty of What Escapes. 2 weeks later, Yumi brought another philosophy. She arrived with a small ceramic vase in her hands. It was clearly imperfect, asymmetrical with an uneven surface, a small crack in the base glued with gold. This is called kinugi, she said, the Japanese art of repairing broken ceramics with gold. The fracture isn't hidden, it's highlighted because imperfection is part of the object's history, and the philosophy I want to convey with this is Wabi-Sabi. She placed the vase on the table between them. Wabi-Sabi is a way of seeing the world that finds beauty in what is imperfect, incomplete, and impermanent, not as consolation, as truth. Because the reality of things, of all things, is that things change and are never exactly as we imagine they should be. Mackenzie looked at the vase. And what does that have to do with me? You've spent your whole life trying to build a life without cracks, her perfect body, a perfect relationship, a perfect performance at work. But life has cracks, Mackenzie, all of them do. And when you stop treating imperfections as flaws that need to be eliminated and start treating them as part of what makes your story real, something changes. Yumi picked up the vase and pointed to the golden line in the crack. The gold isn't there despite the break, it's there because of it. Without the break, there would be no gold. Without the fracture, there would be no history. Mackenzie stared at that vase for a long time after the session ended, and he thought of Camille, of the relationship he had fractured by trying not to let any cracks appear. In one of the following sessions, Yumi asked him to conduct an experiment. The next time you feel that anxiety of needing to control something, it could be a situation at work, an unanswered message, an unmet expectation. I want you to do the opposite of what you normally do. Instead of acting immediately, observe. Just observe as if you were a scientist studying your own internal state. What if the situation gets worse while I just stand by and watch? So you act from clarity. The following week, a disagreement arose with a sea orca. Mackenzie's instinct was immediate. Send an email explaining his position, scheduling a meeting, ensuring he maintained control of the narrative. But he waited. He sat in the chair, watching the anxiety rise. It was physical, a tightness in his chest, tension in his shoulders. He observed it without trying to eliminate it. He just observed. After about 15 minutes, the intensity decreased. And when he thought about the situation with his colleague again, he could see more clearly what had happened and what needed to be done or not. He spoke to his colleague the next day without the defensive email, without the formal meeting. A simple conversation resolved in 5 minutes. In the session with Yumi, he said the situation was the same. I was different. Yumi nodded. That's what Wabi-Sabi teaches in practice. Accepting that imperfection, uncertainty, discomfort, that which is outside your control is part of the real texture of life, and that resisting this texture costs more energy than going through it. Chapter 5, Stoicism and the Only Question That Matters. In the 8th session, Yumi arrived with a phrase written on a card. Some things are within our power, others are not. Marcus Aurelius, Mackenzie asked. Epictetus, she corrected, a Greek Stoic philosopher from the 1st century, but Marcus Aurelius lived by that principle. It's what the Stoics called the dichotomy of control, the fundamental division between what depends on you and what doesn't. She opened a notebook and drew 2 circles, one inside the other. The inner circle consists of the things that are truly within your control, your thoughts, your choices, your values, your response to situations. The outer circle consists of the things that are not. What other people think of you, the results of your work, Camille's behavior, the market, the weather. The problem isn't that things in the outer circle exist. The problem is when you spend your energy trying to control what's in the outer circle as if it were in the inner circle. You weren't living in the inner circle, Mackenzie. You were living in the outer circle and destroying yourself because of it. Yumi left the card with him. Every time you feel that urge to control, ask yourself, is this within my circle? If it's not, your job isn't to control it. That's to decide how you're going to relate to it. Mackenzie started carrying the card in his pocket. And in the first few weeks, it was almost ridiculous how many times a day he would pull out the card, ask, is this in my circle? And realize the answer was no. Most of the things that made him anxious weren't in his inner circle. Most of the suffering he carried was about the outer circle. A few weeks later, Yumi brought NZE into the conversation. Amurati, she said, love of fate. NZE used this expression to describe a radical stance toward life, not just accepting what happens, but loving it. Not in a sentimental sense, in the sense of recognizing that everything that has come to you, including what broke you, has made you who you are, including the breakup with Camille. Including the breakup with Camille, Mackenzie remained silent. Do you think you'll be able to love this? Not now, he said honestly, but I understand what you're saying. That fighting the past is fighting what cannot be changed. It's more than that, Yumi said. It's about realizing that your resistance to what happened doesn't change what happened. It only keeps you there. As long as you carry it like a fracture that shouldn't have existed, you can't carry it like gold. Chapter 6, The First Relapse. In the second month of therapy, Mackenzie seemed to be making progress. The sessions with Yumi had opened something in him that he couldn't name, but he felt it. A kind of inner space that hadn't existed before, and then he bumped into Camille at a supermarket. She was fine, clearly fine. There was something slight about her that he felt like a stab. They talked for about 2 minutes, the kind of polite conversation that happens between people who were once close and are now cordial strangers. That night all the tools he had learned evaporated. Muga, Wabi-Sabi, the inner and outer circles, everything became abstract. What remained was the raw pain of someone who has lost something and still doesn't know how to bear that loss lightly. He sent Camille a message, a long one full of arguments, nostalgia, and an implicit suggestion to try again. The message went unanswered. The next day, he went to the gym in anger and trained as punishment. The shoulder he had injured earlier started hurting again. In the session with Yumi 2 days later, he entered with the expression of someone who had regressed 6 months in 2 days. I failed, he said. Yumi looked at him for a moment. Tell me what happened. He told everything, the supermarket, the message, the gym, the shoulder. Yumi didn't say anything immediately. She picked up the ceramic vase with kinugi that was on her desk and handed it to him. Look at this vase, Mackenzie looked. Did the crack that was patched with gold disappear after being repaired? No, so why do you think healing works this way? That after a few weeks of work, the old pattern disappears completely and never comes back. Silence. What you did wasn't a failure, Mackenzie, it was a relapse, and relapse is part of the process. The difference between those who change and those who don't isn't the absence of relapse. It's what the person does afterward. Did you drink water this morning? Yumi asked. She had established this habit early on as an anchor, a small practice of mindful self-care. Baby, and did he go to work? I went. So you didn't stop, you stumbled, and now you're back. That's all the process requires. There's a concept in Stoicism that Marcus Aurelius practiced, returning to the present. Every time the mind gets lost in rumination, guilt, or what-ifs, you simply return without judging yourself for getting lost, because you will always get lost. Always. The practice isn't about never getting lost, it's about always returning. Mackenzie took a deep breath. I sent the message because I still want to control her. Try and I'll never be able to. No. And when you truly accept that, not intellectually but in your body, something will change. Chapter 7, The Science of Detachment. In the 10th session, Yumi arrived with more research than usual. It was a session she had called the most important class. I want to show you what's happening in your brain, she said, so you understand that what we're working on isn't abstract philosophy. It's physiology. She began with the autonomic nervous system. She explained the difference between the sympathetic mode, fight or flight, constant alarm, high cortisol, and the parasympathetic mode, the state of rest and regulation, where the body regenerates. Where the brain processes clearly, where decisions are better. People who have a high need for control spend most of their time in sympathetic mode. The system wasn't designed for that. It's like a car with the engine in fifth gear all the time, even in the garage. Then she talked about what researchers call cognitive fusion, the state in which you completely identify with your thoughts, as if each thought were a fact about reality. I am failing instead of I am having the thought that I am failing. Acceptance and commitment therapy. One of the most effective models in contemporary psychology works precisely with this diffusion, creating space between yourself and your thoughts, observing without merging. And then she connected it with what Mackenzie already knew. Do you know what Zen monks do when they meditate? Do you know what Muga practitioners train for? Exactly that. creating space between the observer and the observed, between the self that acts and the thought that triggers it. It's no coincidence that ancient practices of detachment are being validated one by modern neuroscience. A brain that learns to let go is not a passive or indifferent brain. It's a more efficient brain with greater capacity for attention, memory, and decision-making. The hippocampus, crucial for memory, literally recovers when chronic stress decreases. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for your best reasoning, functions better when it's not overloaded by the amygdala in alarm mode, so letting go isn't giving up. Fear's freeing up the system to function better. Mackenzie stared at the paper where Yumi had taken notes. Why doesn't anyone teach this? Because the culture you grew up in teaches that control is strength, that letting go is weakness, that if you're not fighting, you're losing. She folded her hands on the table. But the Japanese and the Stoics and now neuroscience show the opposite. Real strength isn't about holding back, it's about knowing when to let go. Chapter 9, Yumi's last lesson. In the 8th-month session, which ended up being one of the last regular ones, Yumi said something that took Mackenzie a long time to fully understand. There's a word in Japanese that doesn't have a direct translation into Portuguese or English. This refers to the space between things. The Japanese consider the ma as important as the things themselves, sometimes more so because it is in the space in the interval that the essence of something is revealed. She looked at him. Everything we work on here, Wabi-Sabi, the dichotomy of control amati, is pointing to the same thing, towards the creation of ma internal, for the ability to create space between stimulus and response. Between fear and action, between the desire to control and the recognition that you cannot. This space is where freedom exists, not the freedom to control everything, the freedom to choose who you want to be in the face of what you cannot control. Mackenzie remained silent for a long time. I think I've spent my whole life urgently filling this void. Most people fill it because space is scary. In space, you're not doing, you're being. And being without doing is frightening for those who have learned that value comes from doing, but it is in being that everything truly happens. Mackenzie is 31 years old now. He still lives in Miami. He still works hard, still has goals, still goes to the gym, but he's different. The difference isn't that he stopped wanting things, it's that he stopped needing those things to exist. And here's what neuroscience, Japanese philosophy, and 2,000 years of Stoicism agree on. This is not a destination state, it's a state of practice, because letting go isn't something you do once. It's something you choose repeatedly in every moment where the ancient instinct appears and says hold on, control, secure. At this moment you have the space, and in that space you choose. Let me remind you of what we covered together in this video. Muga teaches us that the self we cling to is not fixed, and that when you stop confusing your identity with your results, the loss of a result ceases to be the loss of who you are. Wabi-Sabi teaches us that imperfection is not the opposite of beauty, it is where true beauty exists. Cracks repaired with gold tell a story that the intact object could never tell. Stoicism reminds us of the most important question: is this within my sphere of influence? And that the real energy, the kind that truly changes things, lies in acting on what is within your control and letting go of what is beyond your control. And neuroscience confirms what ancient philosophies already knew. A brain that learns to let go is not a weak brain, it's a freer brain, more efficient, more alive. Mackenzie's transformation didn't happen because he became a person without emotions, without desires, without ambitions. It happened because he learned the difference between direction and control, between wanting and needing, between acting with clarity and reacting with fear. And what was left after the control was gone? That afternoon on the sidewalk, listening to the violinist, the hot coffee on the porch, the lightness he hadn't felt in years, the ability to be present, truly present in his own life. Perhaps that's what we're all searching for beneath everything we try to control. Not the guarantee that things will work out, but the freedom to be here now, whole, regardless of what happens. If this video touched you in any way, I invite you to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. This type of content takes time to create, and each subscription is what makes it possible to continue. Leave a comment too. What is the thing you most need to learn to let go of? The answer doesn't need to be long. It can be just one word, but music, write it down because sometimes naming it is the first step. And to recap the 3 practical moves that Mackenzie learned from Yumi and that you can start today. First, when you feel that urgent urge to control something, pause. Ask yourself the Stoic question, is this within my inner circle? If not, your job is to decide how to relate to it, not how to control it. Second, when something doesn't go as planned, resist the doomsday narrative. Remember Wabi-Sabi, the crack isn't the end of the story, it's where the gold will come in. Third, every day create a moment of an intentional break. It could be 2 minutes of coffee drunk in silence without a cell phone, without a playlist, without planning, just you, the coffee, and the present moment. The brain learns through repetition. Teach it that this space is safe, one small thing every day, because the mind that learns to let go doesn't learn all at once. You learn little by little in a training that never ends, but that becomes more and more natural. If you enjoyed this video, I invite you to watch one of the ones that's appearing on your screen right now. You'll definitely learn something valuable from it too. See you in the next video. Be present, walk with honor, follow the black belt discipline,